Hi, Facebook and YouTube. We are live here to talk about getting your book ready for an editor. I'm going to set Instagram up and then we will get started. Hi, Instagram. We are live here to talk about how to get your book ready for an editor. It's going to be a really fun discussion. We are live here on Instagram and over here at Facebook and YouTube, and it's just going to be a ton of fun today, and we're going to learn a lot. So I apologize for the weird lighting thing. Excuse me. The daylight sunlight's weird at the window, and so I turned the lamp on, and anyway. So I apologize, but you guys can still see me, right? Yeah. All right, so before we get started, make sure you ask any questions you have. If you have any questions about the editing process at all, anything that we talk about, anything that comes up while I'm talking, I've just got a few things to cover here. So we're going to talk through those. If you have any questions about writing your book, editing it, or finding an editor, we can talk about all of those things because I'm a professional editor. I've been doing it for, I think, 2.5 years now. And I've been editing pretty much all of my life because that's how my brain works. So I hopefully can answer all of your questions. So it's just going to be a good time today. So there are two things that I want to focus on when you're talking about self-editing. So let me take a drink of water because there's something in my throat. I just finished lunch, so that could be why. Anyway, okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is before you send your book to an editor, before you even consider, maybe, I mean, you can look for an editor because it would be helpful to nail them down. But the first thing you need to do is after you draft your book, you need to do your own self-edits. If you are not self-editing, you are missing out on a lot of things, a lot of ways to make your book the absolute best it can be. So why? I wrote down several whys of why you want to self-edit. So let me cover what self-editing is first before we get into why. Self-editing is basically any work that you do on your book after it's drafted. So your first draft, that's what I mean when I say drafted. Your first draft is just you writing the story. Whether you're a pantser or a plotter, it doesn't matter. Your process will probably be different. But once you get that first draft done, and you type the end or however you like to celebrate. I actually don't type the end. For me, I started, and I've done it differently every time. I actually, this is just kind of a side thing, but I actually will put the date that I completed it in the file name itself because I still do it. Like I'm still old school because I started writing when it was like Word, you know. And then when I switched to Mac, I started using Pages, which I really enjoy using. So that's what I use. But so I always put in the date that I start, and then I'll put a dash and the date that I ended. So I know how long it took me to draft that book. And then when I go to do the second draft, I make a copy of that file. So I always have my first draft to refer back to. I find that is very helpful. And I also have a separate file, what I call deleted scenes, where anything that I delete that's substantial, I mean, if I change a word here or there, I won't, but anything I delete substantial, especially if I'm taking out whole sections or chapters or paragraphs, I will put it in my deleted scenes folder. So if I ever want to go back and reference that, I have it available and I don't just lose something that I wrote. Now that always is, that's while I'm working on the drafts. And then I have a separate file for each draft. So I have a folder for each book. So I've got like, you know, all the different things. So anyway, that's just kind of my process, a little insight there. But the self-editing process is so important because, that's kind of how we got off topic, when you type the end or however you celebrate, like I just explained how I do, and you start doing your other set of edits, it's very important that you focus on self-editing. So, hi, Elizabeth Books. Thank you so much for coming. I am so glad you're here. Again, anyone who has joined, if you have any questions about anything I talk about or anything about the writing process or editing at all, feel free to ask. I'm just here to kind of help you guys out. I always like to do this Tuesday live series. I do a training, something that's kind of been on my mind or things that I've seen that authors are talking about or asking about. And then I'll do a kind of a little training on that. And I'm always up for answering questions. So feel free to ask any questions you have. Okay, if you have a question. All right, go ahead and ask. I will keep moving and then I'll get to the question. Okay, so It says, all right, so why don't we skip self-editing? Well, here are some good reasons. First of all, so the editor understands what you meant. So my thing is when you talk about like, okay, let me just use an example for my life. And I probably talked about this last week too, if you were here, but so I use it a lot. But there was this one scene that I was just convinced it was awesome. It was like kind of steamy. It wasn't in my romance writing, so so it wasn't like explicitly steamy, but I felt like it was still kind of like juicy, and it was like a proposal type deal in my Codex series, something that I wrote that isn't out yet. So you probably don't know what I'm talking about because no one's read it yet. But there was like this really juicy scene. And I was like, ooh, this is kind of steamy. It's kind of sensual. It's got all these little elements. And then when I went back and read it, not so much. It's not really what ended up on the page. So it's important when you self-edit your own books, which if you get anything from this, make sure that you self-edit your own book. Always self-edit. Okay, so we covered that. But the editor, if you do your own self-editing, you can make those corrections to kind of explain what you meant and make sure it kind of feels like what you intended it to be before you pass it off to an editor to polish it and make it shine. The editor, if you just do the first draft and you don't actually like, you know, if you just do the first draft and kind of move on and never look at it again, then it may not have come out in the draft like you intended it to. And then the editor is going to be kind of left guessing at what you say. Now, the editors are professionals. Hopefully you hire a professional that will sometimes usually be able to kind of intuit what you were saying. But the clearer you are, the more clear the editor is going to be as to your intent. And the easier it will be for them to bring out your voice in that story, in the story as you intended it. So it's first thing. All right, we had a couple of questions, so I am going to answer one of them before I move on. Okay, so Elizabeth Books on Instagram here says, do you format your own books? So I am very fortunate in this that I fortunately pass my books off to my husband and he formats them for me. So that was in the Codex series. So Secret of the Codex, Prophecy of the Codex. And then I have this little known book that I wrote. It's a nonfiction book called How to Work from Home. And he actually formatted that one as well. So I was really fortunate that because after rounds and rounds of edits and all of that, I just cannot look at it anymore. And so I'm really fortunate that he formats it for me. And it can actually, sometimes we'll catch things that I didn't catch just because there's another set of eyes on it. So, and I think that might be, yeah, that's actually the next step. More eyes in your manuscript, the better. So that's another reason to self-edit. So cool. It's also another reason to hire an outside formatter. But I fortunately had a professional formatter format, honestly, always you. And I was really happy with the results. And so I do intend to do that moving forward once the Codex series is done because I want them formatted the same way. But so it is possible to format your own books. If you use a program like Vellum, it's not Kindle Vella, the new Wattpad type Kindle thing from Amazon. No, Vellum, V-E-L-L-U-M. It's a really good program for formatting. It's very simple to use, I've heard. My husband's poked around it and says it's really easy to use. He formatted my books manually. We actually bought what you can buy an interior design template, and it will give you kind of all the templates of what you need, and it gives you a sample copyright page, so you can kind of just plug and play type thing. And it's if you do your own formatting, especially if you do it manually and don't use something like Vellum, sorry, if you don't use something like Vellum, I would definitely recommend buying an interior design template. And I think it might just be designtemplates.com or something. I'm not sure exactly. If you're interested in that, you can DM me and I can see if I can figure it out where I got it, because I bought it a few years ago with a license to do it multiple times. So anyway, so that's kind of a side thing about formatting, but yeah, so hopefully that's helpful. Okay, so let's go back to a few whys and then I'll answer another question. Okay, so why else do you self-edit? Yeah, so we talked about that. You make your point clearer when it comes across. So the more times you are scanning it, you can look at the certain like developmental things. You can look at like copy editing, line editing, that kind of thing. But the more you go over it, you'll say that doesn't read very clearly, especially if you've given it some time after your first draft and then take a pause and, you know, come back to it. Then you'll be able to see more clearly, hopefully, what you intended to say and make it a little bit more clear on the page. And then it also helps discover your weak points so that you know what type of editing you need. So for me, this is one of the great benefits of self-editing, because especially if you're new to writing a book and this is the first time you've written a book, or you maybe tried some in the past, but now this is the first time you're actually seriously considering revising it and getting it ready for publication, you may not know where your weak points are, but if you do the self-editing, you will start to understand, okay, if you go through like the different drafts of self-editing, and I do have some resources on that. I have one currently that goes through those different drafts and walks you through it. It's a self-editing ebook, and it's actually a bundle, and it comes with like a checklist and things like that, which is on my website, indieauthorlearning.com. But beside that, and I actually have some plans to beef that up in the future, and some fun things coming up with more self-editing stuff in the near future, hopefully. But once you go through all those different drafts, and you go through the developmental edit and the copy edit and the line edit, which are pretty much the same, and the proofread and all of that, which I do recommend you do all those edits yourself before you pass it off to an editor, because then you see kind of where your weak points are. Like you say, okay, well, I know my story is just lacking. There's holes. I can't figure out how to plug them. I can't figure out how to fix this. It doesn't feel like a complete story. I'm not really sure what to do. Then you would hire a developmental editor to kind of fill it in. Now, on the flip side, if you are not strong in grammar, punctuation, things like that, do your best. Do what you can. Do what you can to clean it up so that it's clearer for the editor when you do hire them. But that's why you hire professionals, so that they can do the clean copy edit, do the proofread for you. And a lot of times so editors can include a copy / line / content edit. There's different names for it. Content edit is kind of like, that's kind of what I focus on, but I also do a line editing in there as well in the same place. And it's basically, the content edit is looking for readability and pacing and flow, clarity, things like that. Whereas the copy edit is more focused on the grammar and making sure that everything works together, things like that. And it's also called line editing because you kind of go on a line by line basis as opposed to looking at the story as a whole. At least that's your focus. Now, sometimes I will catch things that are story, related, and I might mention those, but that's not my focus. And then the proofread is where you just kind of go through, make sure everything is clean and neat and perfect. So, okay, so those are the points of self-editing. Now we have a couple of questions over here. All right, so say something about structural editing for nonfiction books. Okay, so I have written a couple of nonfiction books. They were novellas. So I can kind of speak to this. It's not really my focus. It's not really my area of expertise per se, but I have done it. So this is what I would recommend. So for me, when I write fiction, I'm a pantser, which means that I don't really have a plot. I pretty much establish my characters and the basics of the story, like kind of like where they're at, how I want it to start, and kind of where I think it might end. Like, this is kind of the point of it. And then I just write and see what comes out. So that's kind of how I think about fiction. So I don't do any plotting with fiction at all. I don't do any outlining. But when it comes to nonfiction, for me, that is much more of a masculine type, like head exercise. So when I wrote the How to Work from Home book, I did an outline, and I said, okay, I want to cover these like 8-9 points. And then each chapter was one of those points. And then under each point, I said, okay, I want to talk about this, 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 and those were my subtitles. And then and then you do an intro chapter and a wrap-up chapter, and that's basically a nonfiction book. Now, as you're editing and going through it, there is benefit to making sure thoughts flow together, and there are ways to structure sentences so that they flow and ideas flow from one to the other. So it's not just a bunch of like randomness thrown all together, So there are ways to kind of make nonfiction books flow and have that storytelling element where it's not just the story as the main focus. But as far as structural editing for nonfiction books, and I'm assuming when you say structural editing, that's similar to developmental editing. I think it's kind of interchangeable a little bit. So that would kind of be, if you're not familiar with the term structural editing, that's kind of how I'm understanding it. If I'm incorrect in that, let me know. But with the structural editing or developmental editing for nonfiction, for me, it's more if you do that outline work first, then it's really just coming across like, that's how it is. Like, so I ended up not really doing a whole lot of editing on my nonfiction book because I had outlined it so detailed previously and I knew kind of where I wanted it to flow. It was more of doing the line content copy edit, making sure the sentences read smoothly and making it readable, things like that. And then just making sure it made cohesive sense altogether. So I hope that answered your question. I don't know. I don't know if that was super helpful, but hopefully that helped. Other than the author, him or herself, do you think that anyone else can do the structural editing for nonfiction books? Oh, absolutely. I definitely think they could. You're going to want to find the right editor for that, obviously. And that's part of the self-editing process, even for nonfiction, would be helpful. Just so that you have done all of your, you've done all your due diligence. You have made it say what you want it to say. And then you bring in someone with expertise in that kind of writing that can actually go through the manuscript, make sure it flows well, make sure your thought process is cohesive, because a lot of times this happens in fiction and nonfiction. Things make sense in our head. And then when it gets out on the page, it doesn't quite make sense or doesn't mean what we thought it meant in our head. And this happens a lot. Which is why the self-editing process is so important, because when you draft something, whether in fiction or nonfiction, if you draft something, it sounds great in your head, but when you get it onto the page, it might not say what you think it says, or it might not come across that way. So that's why it's so important to self-edit, so that it's closer to what you actually meant, and then a good editor will come in and actually almost, it's kind of scary almost. If you get a good editor that's a good fit for your book, which we'll talk about how to do that in a minute. If you find a good editor that's a good fit for your book, they'll actually be able to bring out what you said and say it in a way that still feels authentic to you, but it just is like a smoother version of how you said it on the page. And that's really the benefit of great editing. Okay, I answered it. Awesome. Thank you so much for your question, VC. I appreciate that. All right, also, any other questions that you guys have? I would love to hear them. I've got a little bit more of the training, and I'm going to answer another question because I have one. All right, what do you read on your own time? Pretty much what I read all the time. So primarily, I've been on like this romance kick. Like that's kind of my thing. A lot of my author friends are romances, and I read a lot of ARCs, early advanced copies, review copies, I guess. Depends on who you talk to. So I read a lot of ARCs. So that kind of was part of the reason I had started to make friends with some romance authors, and I had never read romance prior to that. But I started to make some friends with some romance authors, and so I started reading their books. I'm like, oh, this is a cool genre. So I just started reading more. And now I've actually transitioned to, I really don't like to read paper books, like paperbacks or hardbacks or anything. I really enjoy the ease and convenience of my ebook reader on my phone. So I actually read everything on my phone, unless I'm working on it, then I'll be on my computer. But I read everything on my phone with my Kindle app. And so I read primarily ebooks. And right now I don't have a lot of books that aren't romance on my Kindle. So I do have some nonfiction. I will read those from time to time. Those I don't read as quickly, but I have some like self-help, self-improvement, that kind of stuff. I really like Jen Sincero's series. I don't know what she calls the series, but it's like, you are a badass. You're a badass at making money. You're a badass at making badass every day or something. I'm not sure, but I really like her series. And there's a couple of other one. I got a Donald Miller one that I'm going to start on about marketing. And then there's I believe, trying to remember the name of it. I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, but it was a really good book. Just kind of like getting into the like a mindset state, because I've been doing a lot of work on my mindset, so I read that kind of stuff. But before, when I was reading physical books, so it's really funny because my books have been packed away for about a year. We moved recently across the country and we're in a lot smaller apartment. So we don't have them out. And because I read ebooks, I don't really need them out. But I do have quite a collection of YA. I don't know how you describe it. Like I have the Twilight series. I've got the Hunger Games series. I've got, I think the Maze Runner series, or at least the first book. I read the Divergent series, like things like that. So I was really into like a lot of YA stuff. I love Dan Brown, like one of my favorite authors. Him and Stephen King, like auto buy, auto read type. Well, Stephen King has way too many books for me to get all at once, but love to read their books. Dan Brown, I actually think I have all of his books. So I've read all of his books. Well, not his last one. I didn't get all the way through that one. But anyway, so that's kind of like, I have like a variety of different things that I read. So with Stephen King, the horror. I've read a lot of romance. I've read, when I was growing up, I read a lot of Frank Peretti, if you've heard him. It's kind of like action, but it was like from a Christian worldview. I read a lot of clean romance as a teenager, I think. Kid, teenager. And then, yeah, so I've just kind of like read all kinds of genres. Like I really enjoy a lot of different things. Yeah, so I hope that answered your question. That was fun. Yes, nice. Okay, great. Yes, thank you for your question. I love these. Keep the questions coming. I'm having a lot of fun answering these questions. Okay, and if for anyone, if you haven't seen my setup. So I'm live on Instagram, so I'm taking questions there. And then I'm also taking questions on Facebook and YouTube too. So if you're getting confused and you're not seeing these questions, that's why. So I'm trying to read them so you understand. Okay, so number 2, getting your book ready for an editor. That's what we're talking about today, but I'm loving these questions. So we got even one more. And so I will get back to that in a second. But finding an editor, there are a couple of different ways to do it. You can ask around, ask your other author friends, post on social media, I'm looking for an editor. What do you recommend? You can look for, on Instagram, I think on Twitter, you can look for different hashtags. And I think, does that work on Facebook? I'm not sure. Anyway, so we'll find out. But so just kind of like look around for editors and like different posts like that, see what other authors are doing, follow some other authors. Sometimes you can look in like the copyright section, the copyright page will list the editor for the book, or you can look in the acknowledgements and that, might tell you who their editor was. You can reach out to the author directly if you're really impressed with their book and you're like, hey, I love your book. Who's your editor? That kind of thing. Authors generally love to give recommendations if they liked who they worked with. And that's, I get a lot of my recommendations or my referrals from authors who have worked with me in the past. So, so word of mouth is a great way to find an editor, but I know that can be tricky. So looking on social media, I mean, a Google search probably, but just, hearing about someone, doing your research. And that's one of the most important things I tell you is to do your research. And I've got some other tips here for you too. But you can just reach out to editors directly. This is part of doing your research, making sure that they, and I don't necessarily recommend you have to say that they're accredited or have a certain certification or anything like that, because I myself do not. I don't have any formal training in book editing, but my focus is not so much on the formal training. Now, I do have a lot of grammar and proofreading skills and things like that, because that's just my personality. That's just what I do for fun. I legit used to read the dictionary for fun. Anyway, so back when we actually had dictionaries, and it wasn't just on your phone. Anyway, so it's just something I've developed over time, but I don't have the certification for that. So I don't say that you have to do that, and you don't always have to hire an experienced editor either, but you have to be careful when someone's not experienced. You want to make sure that if you're going to take on someone just starting in editing, that they know what they're doing, they're a good fit for your book. So that's what I'm saying. It's not necessarily like if they don't have a lot of prior clients, everyone has to start somewhere, but you just want to make sure that they're going to be a good fit for your book. So my recommendation for that, and this is what I do for my clients or potential clients, is I offer a sample edit. Now, some editors, if they have been around long enough and have a big enough base, they might actually charge for a sample edit. I do not. A lot of authors, especially if they're starting out, probably won't. Sorry, my eye is itching there. Anyway, so definitely get a sample edit. Now, for me, I generally will say, you know, sometimes it's the first chapter, but first chapters can be a little long. So I will generally give an approximate word count for a sample just to kind of see, because I've had people send me like a really long first chapter and I'm like, okay, I can't, that's a little bit too much of a sample. But just kind of a sample to be able to get the feel for it. And then I will do an edit on that. And then that way the author gets to see, you as the author get to see what kind of editing I would do and if it would work for you. And then that way I'm able to give a custom quote as well. So always, if you can do it, get a sample edit. The only reason would be maybe if you've worked with them before or you really are familiar with their work. But even then, they should give you a sample edit. And hopefully it won't cost much or at all. Always make sure they have a contract. I do this with my clients. If it's like, if I do a beta read, which is a lower dollar because there's not a lot of time investment, obviously not as much time investment as a full copy edit, I will just have some contract terminology on the invoice itself. But for a large edit, you're going to be spending a significant amount of money on your book. So you want to make sure they have a contract that covers you, covers them, make sure everything is copacetic, is the right word. Ask questions. If you're uncomfortable or unsure of anything in the process, ask questions. Make sure you're clear on what it is. Now, the editor will have different levels of communication. They will, you'll kind of get a feel for if they communicate well, that kind of thing. Just make sure it fits with your personality, because if the editor is not very communicative and you are looking for that and you want that, then maybe that's not the right editor for you. Now, I know for me, I'm not the right editor for everyone, and that's okay. There are sometimes, you know, situations where, hey, this would not the right fit, and that's okay. Like, we're not always all the right fit for everyone, and this is just a general marketing thing. Your book is not for everyone, right? That's what they tell you. Like, if you get a 1-star review, you're not writing for the people. They give you a 1-star review. You're writing for the people who give you a 5-star review and who love your book. So don't worry about it. If you find an editor and you just trust your intuition, if you feel like it's not quite a good fit, it's probably not, and you should keep looking. Even if it feels like you're under a deadline and you're under crunch, like, just make sure that it's a good fit, because you are just not going to, it's just not going to be good in the future, and ultimately going to pay more in heartache and stress and loss of mental health. Yeah, so like I said, that's my next point, speak up. Make sure if there's anything that doesn't quite feel right to you, speak up. Now, it could just be maybe some things quite aren't right, but if you can have a conversation, sometimes editors could get on like the phone with you or a Zoom call or something, and you guys can work out kind of where the issue is. That'll work. Maybe it's just that you just need to communicate a little bit better or a little bit more clearly, and then it could still be a good fit for you. And then the last tip I wanted to say is make sure they fit your vision for your book, which is why I really do not like to do an edit. I don't want to commit to an edit until I do a sample edit on my side. It not only benefits you as the author, because you can look at all the different, like, you know, you can analyze and see how they edit it, and you can get a good fit for it. But for me too, it allows me to make sure that I have, you know, I'm going to edit a certain way. That's just like my style. It's an editing style. There's different versions of it. And each editor will edit just a little bit differently. So once you get that sample edit back, you can tell if they're going to fit the vision for your book or not. Because if they do some edits that just like seems like they're taking it in a completely different direction, then maybe it's just not a good fit. And that's okay. Like I said, not everyone is meant for everyone. So, and while we're talking about tips, I actually did create a free ebook about this. This is one of those ebooks I wrote, Nonfiction. It's called 10 Questions to Ask Every Author Should Ask a Prospective Editor. It's a really long title, and I haven't figured out how to cut it down. But it's basically 10 questions that every author should ask a prospective editor, and the answers that you're looking for, things to look for in your editor, how to know, like we talked about a little bit here, but talks about how to know when you're ready for an editor, the different types of editing available, kind of a, you know, like explicit, that's where just a very clear definition of each. And then those 10 questions and what the answers you're looking for. So I did put the link in the YouTube and the Facebook video, and there's a link in my bio and Instagram. So you can get that free editing ebook. And you know, if this is where you're at in the process and you're looking for an editor, I would highly recommend that resource. Totally free. Just sign up for the email and I will send it to you. And then, of course, if you're interested in my editing services, the link to that is in my bio and also below in the description on YouTube and Facebook. If you're interested in that, I have a couple of openings in October. And yeah, so I'd love to chat with you about your book and talk to you more about it. All right, before we wrap up, so we're at 30 minutes, but this has been such a fun discussion, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it. We do have a couple more questions, so I'm going to cover those, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so BC asks, how many words do you think a good book should be? My book will probably be around 20,000 words, nonfiction. What do you say? Okay, so like I said, my expertise is not nonfiction. I have written a few. I think that there are standards, and then, but you can really do anything you want. So it really depends on what your objective is, and if you achieve that objective in those 20,000 words. So if you want, say if you're trying to teach someone a skill, if you successfully taught that skill in 20,000 words, then you probably don't need any more words. If there are things that you left out that would be necessary for them to understanding what you're trying to say or teaching them that skill, then I would recommend adding more. So I think it's nice, because if you're trying for traditional publication, where like the old days where you would have to submit to an agent, and then the agent would have to find a publishing house, and then you would, you know, sign a contract with the publishing house, you get an advance, they distribute it, all of that kind of stuff. That model is largely going away, or at least it's tweaked for the modern world. But if you are self-publishing, really anything is game. You can do whatever you would like. It's probably, the word count may affect your pricing, just depends. But I mean, there are nonfiction books from free 99 cents up to whatever, $15.99 for an ebook. So it really depends on what you want. Now, I know that there are, if you're publishing through Amazon, there are restrictions about how large your book has to be able to do a spine, like a printed spine with words on it. I'm not sure what that is off the top of my head. I tend to be wordy, so my books don't really come in danger of that. But yeah, so that might be a consideration. But again, it's most important for nonfiction book, and really with fiction too. With fiction, it's if you told the story the way it needs to be told, and you haven't left out too many important details, then the book needs to be what it's going to be. That would be considered a novella. For nonfiction, if you have achieved the objective that you set out to achieve, if you have taught them the skill or give them the knowledge or inspired them in some way, whatever the objective of your book is, if you have achieved that in 20,000 words, then that's probably where your book should sit, and that's where it should be published. But again, that's a kind of personal decision. So hope that helps. Okay, last question. But if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to continue if you do. But this is the last one we have right now. I've been researching about the best recommended ebook and print book selling platforms. It would be nice if you discussed that too. Sure. So there are, I can give you okay, so what I use is Amazon. It is probably the simplest and the big player in the world of self-publishing. So yeah, so I use Amazon for my print books and my ebooks. I actually sign up on the author side, it's called KDP Select. On the user side, it's called Kindle Unlimited. So when you sign up, when you enroll your book in KDP Select, you are promising to be exclusive with Amazon for a period of 90 days, and then it's automatically recurring unless you cancel it, but for that period of 90 days. And you are basically saying, I'm going to only have this ebook for sale on Amazon. and they have restrictions about if you can make it free and not, which you can't. So just be aware of that. Make sure you read the rules. Can't do the whole book free except for certain situations. It's kind of sticky. But anyway, Kindle Unlimited, if a reader has Kindle Unlimited, they can read your book in that program as part of their subscription, and then you will get paid for page reads. Yeah, I did say that right. So basically, if they read your entire book, they somehow figure out how many pages your book would be in an ebook format. And then you will get paid per page a certain rate. And then that's how you get paid. And instead of someone purchasing your book. But you can also have purchases too, of course. That's just if someone's in Kindle Unlimited. So that's kind of how that process works. That's what I use for all of my books so far. I've been happy with KDP Select. I like the option that people have if they're in Kindle Unlimited. They can basically read my book for free, not really free, but if they subscribe to Kindle Unlimited, it's free for them to read. So yeah, so I do that. But if you do choose not to do that, then a lot of kind of in the industry, the term is to go wide with your ebooks and put them on all different platforms. So like Apple, and I've heard of Kobo. I have no idea what it is, but I'm sure you guys could tell me what it is because I really don't know. There's some other ones, like international ones that I'm not really familiar with. Maybe Barnes & Noble, things like that. Anyway, I'm not well versed in that because I just have mine on Kindle Unlimited on KDP Select with Amazon. There is also a company I would be remiss if I did not mention called Ingramspark. It can cost a little bit there is a fee to upload your book and to make changes to your book. But I have heard that you can set up a paperback pre-order, push it to Amazon so that people can pre-order your paperback. Now, I tried this for my first book, my debut novel. You can actually use both in conjunction. You can use Amazon and Ingramspark. But if you're under KDP Select, you can't use Ingramspark to do ebooks, just paperback, if that makes sense. Because, you can't do both. Anyway, so I've heard the setup. So when I tried to do this with The Secret of the Codex back in 2018, I signed up for both. I think I got like sometimes they'll have like coupon codes where you can upload your book for free or whatever. So I think I did that. I tried to get it set up. Now there are two different printers, so you're going to need to get two different proofs and things like that. So it can get a little hinky. And then when I actually got my proof from Ingramspark, I didn't really like the quality as much. And there was some weird printing error that it took me weeks to resolve. And so by the time I got it resolved, my book was going to release like 2 days later. And so the pre-order was pretty much, why did I go through all this hassle? So I don't really use Ingramspark anymore. It's not that I don't necessarily recommend it. I just didn't like the extra drama, the extra setting things up. I didn't feel like a pre-order paperback was that important. And the reason is because on Amazon, you can't do a pre-order paperback. You can do a pre-order ebook. Okay, so anyway, and then there's also like Draft to Digital. I've heard good things about. I'm not really familiar with their service. I've looked into them a few times, but I'm happy with the way I do it. So I haven't really looked into that, but yeah. So I hope that was helpful. It's kind of my quick overview of that. That's kind of how I think about it. All right. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions, and this has been a long one today, which is fun because I had a lot of interaction, and I'm so glad about that. Thank you guys so much. I do this every Tuesday at 3 o'clock Pacific, which is 6 p.m. Eastern, and it's just my Tuesday live series, and I do, I talk about book stuff, talk about the author life, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, so definitely check out the links if you're interested in that free editing ebook. I would love to send that to you. It's just, like I said, it's free. So sign up for that. And if you have any questions about editing or you are looking for an editor, feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you later, Facebook and YouTube.